Hey, everybody. Welcome to Jackass Politics, the only show where the takes are hot, the hosts are always pissed, and the politicians are somehow dumber than we ever expected. I'm Adam, your hometown Wake Forest commissioner. We got Ian with us here. Ian, you want to say hello?
Yeah, I'm back after being sick the last episode, so sorry for that. But yeah, we are here with Grayson Barnette today. How you doing, Grayson?
What's going on, fellas? How you doing?
So, what is your
Good.
official title, Grayson? Let's get that out of the way.
I wear a couple of them, but my main title, I'm the principal strategist and co-founder of Express Lane Strategies. We are a political consulting firm that focuses mainly on North Carolina races. We advise different party leaders, different campaigns, different candidates, and we of course run campaigns from the ground all the way through advertising, digital, mail, media production, all the fun stuff. And then we have advised a couple other folks around the country that don't live in North Carolina, but serve the party in one way or another. So that's my main title. I also advise various groups. I serve on the Blue Ridge Heritage Board, which I am deeply passionate about. I'm the co-chair of that, as well as I'm a senior advisor to the North Carolina Democratic Party. And I also pick up the phone for anybody else who calls me. So good to be with y'all, fellas. Appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely.
So, North Carolina has been a battleground state the past couple years. We have, we're a pretty purple state. A lot of our statewide races have been pretty neck and neck. Obviously, we still have one that's completely unsolved at the moment because it's been decided by about 400 votes or something around there. But North Carolina, as far as our congressional uh, representation, is predominantly red. And the reason being is that Republicans have won several different court cases all the way up to the Supreme Court that have allowed them to gerrymander the shit out of this state. So, Grayson, you being a great strategist, how do you see the plot forward for us being able to get to where we can actually get this state to be more represented more equally?
Yeah, it's a good question. That's kind of the $1 million question. Well, really, a couple $100 million. I think we're at this point, right? You know, the the things that the Republicans did many years ago, whenever they found themselves in a similar territory with presence in certain areas and kind of certain pockets of support across the state. We have to do those now. We have to actually go out and do them in a modern context. We have to build our bench up from the ground up, which you know well, of course, Adam. But of course, we have to go to some of these areas and expand our territory. There's simply no path forward for North Carolina Democrats or Democrats at large in the country seceding 95% of counties because even though the population, of course, lives in the large counties, your urban counties, there are still a significant portion of people who live in the rural counties. And the way that our government structure is set up is that those counties are going to have representation. The way that we can combat that in North Carolina specifically is that we can go out there and build folks from the ground up and prioritize everybody and every issue and just stop micro targeting ourselves to irrelevance. I've been on a kick about that. I've been telling anybody that I can. I think that there were good intentions whenever we come into some of the more competitive races and we say, okay, we know that we only need to talk to this bucket of people. I think there's a decent intention there. But until the Democrats find a message that appeals to everybody, not only in North Carolina, but across the country, we're going to be stuck. We're going to be backed into a corner, both literally and figuratively, because we're finding ourselves only being able to compete in the metro areas or the areas that are adjacent or the majority minority areas. And some of the majority minority areas in North Carolina, we've been losing ground there as well due to multiple factors. So it's interesting to see the conversations happening at the national level. Of course, here we have, Chair Anderson Clayton has been a huge proponent of making sure that we're investing in and having a strong Democratic Party in every single county of the 100 counties we have here in North Carolina. But that doesn't stop here, right? We have to expand that from not only the counties to the congressional districts, to the regional coalitions. The things that we put together in terms of the campaign infrastructure has to have geography in mind. We have to be able to go out there to the far west, the far east, the Outer Banks, the Northeast, the Sandhills, and everywhere in between so that we're able to spread our message and have a message that brings people individually. Not only will it benefit us with higher margins in the statewide races, but of course it will benefit us with geography. And we'll start to win some of the state legislative races that are absolutely dependent on geography and geographic factors. If Adam, you know this. You live in an area where the northern portion of your county was the rural portion, but is now growing rapidly and has historically been represented kind of in conjunction with or in, drawn kind of across county line to one of the more rural counties across from Wake County. That's changing rapidly as your area grows, very, very quickly. Some of these areas, your town has now become almost equal population or larger population to some of the counties that used to be represented
Right.
with it.
Yep.
So as we grow rapidly as a state, as we have certain pockets of growth that are coming quickly, and those are not exclusive to the metro areas as well. You can look at Brunswick County, Transylvania County, Henderson County. These areas are growing rapidly and their politics are changing because of it. So what we've got to do as a party is go on the ground and kind of help empower some folks to get these trends going, to get them going a little bit better. And of course, to appeal to the people who've lived here for a long time as well. We're not going to win just by registering people who are moving to North Carolina.
Yeah.
And I think there's some kind of, some of my colleagues would say that the people who are moving to North Carolina are overwhelmingly Democratic. And I would argue with that every day of the week, because what we're seeing is about like a 1.25, 1.5 in to 1 on the other side. So for every, 1.25 Democrats, we're getting 1 Republican as well. So while we might be winning that in the very, very long-term conversation, the medium and short-term conversations, we are not winning that argument. And the truth of the matter is if we see any ground with our existing demographic coalition, young voters, black voters, brown voters, folks who are, feeling left out from the party right now, who might be in the working class or union voters or wherever you are, we're going to continue to lose because we can't bring in people if we're also hemorrhaging people on the other side. So geographic investments in, in expanding our party base while also keeping our coalition has to be the top priority for every Democratic Party in the country right now.
For sure. And one thing I do think, and I say this like every episode now, one thing I hear is that we probably need to be building a shit ton more housing so that we can keep getting that 1.5 extra.
That's good for our state. The housing crisis that we're facing in the country should be something that Democrats are talking about and getting on the right side of this issue, because people my age, even people your age, kind of in between and below, are really feeling this right now.
Yeah.
If you didn't buy a house 10, 15, 20 years ago, you're probably not going to buy one if you're my age right now. You're not only is there limited availability with stock, but home ownership itself seems like a foreign concept unless you've inherited something or you're doing way better off financially. Especially for those folks who live in those metro counties like we were talking about. The stock there is completely busted, but you can look no further than some of the rural counties as well to determine that. I grew up in rural Caldwell County, very, very rural. Grandfather Mountain, just south, Blowing Rock is on the northern tip, multiple rivers, very, very rural, very, very, a bunch of national forest land. And even we only had 1 month stock as of when I last checked.
Yeah.
People want to move to Western North Carolina. They want to move to North Carolina. Let me be very clear, but they want to move to other pockets of North Carolina as well, right? There's, Western North Carolina at large, Northwest, Far West, Asheville area, all are growing, and Eastern North Carolina is growing as well.
Mm-hmm.
Brunswick County can't put up houses quick enough. They're running over Venus flytraps and native habitat to build as many houses as they possibly can down there because they've just put it off for so long. And we can talk about the density of housing and stuff, but these are the issues that people are feeling that the Democratic Party used to, I think, be better on. And now we've kind of handcuffed ourselves due to concerns that, in my mind, aren't particularly relevant to the electoral conversation.
I would point out though that we also don't need to cede because there's been 4 bills that just recently got brought up dealing with housing in North Carolina. I know one of them's like the single stair up to 6 stories. There are a couple other like dealing with missing middle and stuff like that. But we don't need to allow the Republican Party to also take that over, because this is one of the conversations that I had with the Progressive podcast when I went on there, is that while, Abundance, the book, was talking about, hey, we just need to build, 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 build. While true, there is, I think, a little bit of a gray area there too, like just allowing any and all things. There's even House Bill, I think 785 or 795 or something like that, where they want to put civil penalties on somebody, a town commissioner like myself, for voting against a bad development, because there is bad development. There are some real shitty things that they want to do sometimes, and we should be able to have the flexibility at the local area. Like if somebody wants to destroy a beautiful habitat that is pretty well protected and stuff, but not protected enough by our laws just yet, we should be able to have a negotiating with that. Like we can't even put conditional zoning with this bill. That we can't work out deals with developers. And some of the best deals that we've had in this town have been where there was pushback from the community. I go to the developer and say, "Hey, this is what we're looking at," and then we find ways to be able to make it where we still allow that building to be built, and we make that project better through our negotiations, but we do that through conditions. Maybe there's putting fences and stuff like, in between some other areas and stuff. Like if there's a higher elevation, I remember one project where the elevation they wanted to build in was here, and the people here, and they were like, well, if we allow you to build, you're just going, it's creepy that somebody could just look out and just oversee everybody's backyard, right? So easy solution, just putting a fence up, right? But that was not something that the developer wanted to do. They weren't just going to do it out of the kindness of their hearts, right? Like they're in it to make money. So it was a Republican that came up with this bill that, hey, let's allow the Home Builders Association to sue if they think that we were wrong in denying something, and then also let's institute civil penalties. That's the Republican way of dealing with this shit. That's not what we want, right? Like
Right.
we do want the housing to be built, but we can't allow them to lead on this, because otherwise I might get my ass thrown in jail or sued into oblivion because I didn't like the way that something was doing and I'm trying to fight for my community,
Well,
right?
Adam,
So
keep in mind the Republican definition of local control starts and stops at the General Assembly, my friend. There's no local
I
control
mean,
at the municipal level. But that's exactly what I was talking about. I come from a conservation background. At the top, I mentioned, I'm on the Blue Ridge Heritage Board. Those are two important things, right? Like we can balance these priorities, and that's like what you were talking about, right? Like density and missing middle, right? Like not every development is a good thing,
right.
even though those make the most money. Like I said, if there's a deep environmental trade-off, right? There's a trade-off with everything. There's
Sure.
obviously an opportune cost for doing something and not doing something, and everything. We certainly understand that, but at a certain point, we have to be the self-regulators, right? We have to allow you to do your job as someone who knows this community, not someone who's sitting in Raleigh, right? Who's saying, no, a blanket, everybody across the state can't do this. We've dealt with this a lot in Western North Carolina with Helene, right? And I'm on the ground. I live in Western North Carolina, currently live in Morganton, which is a beautiful area right at the base of Table Rock, convergence of a couple rivers and the Linville Gorge. And if you've never been here, please come, because we definitely need tourism right now. But please check the U.S. Forest Service maps before you go hiking, please. The terrain has just changed out there, y'all.
Yeah.
But we have to have areas, right? But we don't need to develop a development at the base of Table Rock, right? Just because someone likes to see that view and it's particularly valuable. And the people here, the community, would not have that as well. Like that's the other portion of this is the Republicans that don't allow it to come to my community are then going to Raleigh to govern and tell you that you can't do it in your community, Adam. And I think that's where, I start to have the big issues here. But we can balance conservation and housing of stock and affordability and all of these conversations. In fact, people want it. They actually want it. They demand it, if nothing else, right? And that's why we have some great groups. I come from a land conservation background. Briefly, I joined the nonprofit space, kind of coming away from my policy time, a little bit of a transition while I started my business. I worked for Foothills Conservancy in North Carolina. It's a great land trust. We're so lucky to have a network of land trusts in North Carolina that cover the entire state. We're very, very lucky to have that. We have a lot of public land here in North Carolina. We're well above the national average, well above the curve. Please come visit. Again, like we have some beautiful places that are worth seeing. But the people who move to North Carolina, they want those amenities. That's why they're moving here.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that this misconception that people are moving here just for jobs or just for this or just for that is wrong. I think that people are moving here because North Carolina is a great place to live at large. We have all of this. You can live in an area that is both 2 hours from the beach and 2 hours from the mountains equally. You can live in an area that pays you a good wage while you also have access to some of the recreational activities and outdoors, and you can shop and hike in the same day. And I think that's a very cool thing that we offer, right? We've built our small communities around this, but that's going to change unless we have folks who step up. And in the wake of Helene, right? These Republicans who are still focused on regulating your communities and doing what lobbyists want are not passing and distributing money that comes from the General Assembly. That just point blank period. They are holding it as much as they can for corporations. They're waiting on people like Trump to, give another very generous, right, Biden level extension to FEMA funding whenever he's trying to, at the same time, cut the organization. So, the Republicans can't have their cake and eat it too. They're got to realize that, right? You can't both support the things that Trump are doing and also want Western North Carolina to recover and also want our communities to look like they should. The Republican policies are constantly butting heads with each other because you've got one group of good old boys and you've got one group of lobbyist folks. And people like Paul Newton, who come off the Duke Energy Board right into the state Senate and then serve there and make Duke Energy have 0% taxes and constantly get state plans and just kick their clean energy goal down the road, right? And they also pay Democrats to do that. And if you're listening, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And they've got this Duke Energy person, right? And then what's he get? Oh, and a cushy little attorney spot at UNC. Whenever he's come and he's done his service to the monopoly in town, he gets to go off and have the service. And we as Democrats, we don't get to do that anymore. We get to throw our people to the wolves. Oh, you get to run for Congress in a 41-59 seat. Thank you, sir. We appreciate it. We'll see you in 2 years. And we can't, it's hemorrhaging, right? Like, it's very tough to be in the minority party whenever like you have someone on the other side who has done everything they possibly can to kneecap you, gerrymander you, and make it impossible for you to gain any traction. If we did well this year, they'd find another reason to change the maps. You guys know that, right? Like that's, and that's the whole thing about it. We got our biennial redraw coming up at some point here, right? So, it's all these priorities, right, Adam? But at the end of the day, man, they sit in Caldwell County and make sure that Wake Forest can't do nothing.
That damn right, man. So speaking of some North Carolina policy, man, let's get into the weeds a little bit. Do you think, because I've heard some kicking around that Burgers I got to remember we're national now. He's our Senate leader. So apparently there's going to be some real tight constraints on the budget. I know he's been trying to kick off more casino gaming and stuff so that they can make up the loose ends there. But I've also heard that they're trying to get medicinal marijuana passed. Do you see that ever happening in North Carolina?
I'll tell you exactly why that's happening. There's a guy, his name is Bill Rabin, and he represents the southeastern area of North Carolina. And he had cancer. He had very, very bad cancer. And his son convinced him to try medical marijuana, and it changed his life. And now he is absolutely championing that issue, but nobody in this caucus will listen to him, and he just happens to have a certain like a clout, right? Yeah. So it's one of those things where I want to be very, very clear. Hemp is growing, is sold, is regulated in North Carolina right now. Mm-hmm. Like for those listening, sold, regulated, grown, the whole jam, right? There is there's a cap on the amount of THC products, right? And if you know anything about marijuana regulation, the only reason I really know about cannabis regulation is because whenever I worked at the state Senate, Kirk Deviere was he's a veteran leader. He was a state senator, and he was working on this bill. So we got a chance to kind of jump into the deep end a little bit about like what these things actually mean, what they do, what the medical uses are. I will say that the bills that they've pushed forward have been shit. They're terrible. They allow 10 companies that have to have previous business experience. Do you know what I mean? Which means they're all monopoly or corporate type companies that are going to come. And for those on the ground in North Carolina, we want to give our farmers an opportunity to get in on this.
Yep.
Right. We want to give our farmers an opportunity to rip that tobacco out the ground and put hemp in because it's going to sell for 2 or 3 times more and rejuvenate the land and be a carbon sink and all this beautiful, amazing stuff. Right. Look to my buddy, Patrick Brown. He's up in Brown Family Farms up there in Northampton County, Warren, Northampton. Great guy. He's been growing hemp for many years now. He's a USDA guy. Look to him for any regulatory practice at all because he grows high value vegetables and hemp in it where they used to grow tobacco. And now he has been able to employ dozens of people, have a productive, valuable business that does not rely on subsidies as much as it previously did. But the perfect storm that we're getting right now for farmers that pushes everything to corporations is ripping out of USAID and then like and increasing the regulations of what they're allowed to grow. That is the quickest way to get every farmer who's a small farmer, medium-sized family farmer out of business. It's the quickest way. And until we actually move things like medical marijuana, or at least allow the growing and distribution of this and allow folks to get in on the industry so they have the 5 years that they need to apply for a permit whenever they eventually pass this, then we're not going to be able to get ahead on this. And we're going to rely on businesses that live in or that are based in Virginia, South Carolina, or God forbid, even Tennessee to come in and actually run these, right? Meanwhile, the Eastern Band of Cherokee said, no, we're going to get ahead of this. We're growing it. We're selling it. We're going to do our own production company. And they're making a bunch of money on it. And we look foolish. I will also say there's a member of the Republican leadership on the House side that may or may not own a CBD distribution company. So just go ahead and Google that and see what comes up, right? That's why, you see the House and the Senate having different opinions on these things. There's a couple liquor distributors and heathens on the House side, right? And then you got some good old boys on the Senate side that really don't like all that, right? And, So
I did hear years ago that the reason why that what would be the breaking point in North Carolina is when the leadership has their people in place to be able to make all the money off of it. Kind of like what they were trying to do in Cleveland years ago when they put it on the ballot that it was going to be like 8 people that were going to reap all the benefits. But I want to bring it back full circle to kind of like what we were talking about. If we are not able to compete in the rural areas, it's bills like this that we need to be championing, in my opinion, to be able to bring those rural farmers back in, right? Like, I guess I'll kick that to you. What other type of, how do we win in the rural areas? Because I grew up in Roanoke Rapids, North Carolina, which is up just a little north for our national
right where I
folks,
was
a little
talking
north
about.
of Northampton County.
Yeah, that's right.
But, it's a very rural area. It's a very poor area. I think it's one of the poorest parts of North Carolina now. And there's just no like real businesses there that they're going down economically every year. So how do we win people in that area? Because they just look at us at like we're a bunch of baby killers. I mean, that's literally all I hear. You damn commie Democrat baby killer. That's all I hear when I go back home. They don't understand like. Because I've always seen that like in a city we all have to rely on each other, right? Like I live in a townhome, I have neighbors that are like up and beside me, so I see people every day. I have to interact with them, I have to get along with them, whereas in the rural areas you don't have to, right? Like you're not you're not getting as much help unless you're a farmer, probably from the government, right?
You can
might get
choose
your
who you be
Social
around.
Security. What's that?
You can choose who you be around, right?
And you choose who you be around, right?
Yep. And you can't
So
always do that
that's
in the metro area.
so how is it that we win that battle again? How do we get them back on our side? And what policies do you think that we need to be carrying forward to be able to get to where we can compete in rural areas?
That's a great question. And I have this discussion quite a bit. And I want to say that I could have an individual discussion about this in every 78 of each one of the 78 rural counties in North Carolina, right? Like we could absolutely talk about that. And I think that that's my first point is we have to understand the nuance and the intricacies of each county, right? Adam, I can't tell you what's best for Roanoke Rapids. You got to tell me. You know what I'm saying? And the moment that we do that, the moment that we start listening and stop talking at people, I think we're going to start to figure it out. But it also is this whole thing of, there was I'm not going to say names, but there was a candidate and, I'm not where I am in my career, but they came to visit my county party in rural Caldwell County, which I appreciated. And I told him, even though it's a tough district, I was like, I think it's worth fundraising. I think it's worth, having conversations with folks. I think it's still worth trying, for lack of a better word. And the response I got was something attuned to these dumb hillbillies won't vote for their best interests. And as one of them dumb hillbillies, I promise y'all, we know what's best for us.
Yeah.
And I think that there's so much condescension. And if you're listening to this, I'm begging you to hear me on this, because as Democrats, we think that we know best for people, but what we've got to do is offer a path that tells them and lets them understand that it is in fact the best path. It's not here's a 40-page plan that, everybody's favorite U.S. Senator from a northern state put up that's, you and I read it and we love it, right? But, my grandpa would never touch that thing. That's the point here is we've got to show up for people, and we have to show up with a very neutral ground in a way that they understand, right? We can't be like, to some extent, we can't necessarily say even that like your previous votes have hurt you. Like we have to go and say your next vote will help you. And I think that there's a lot of nuance to this, right? Your previous votes hurt you versus your next vote will help you are two very different conversations here.
Yeah.
And until we understand some of the nuance of talking to folks at large and not listening to the person from respectfully Oregon or California or New York or something that replied to your comment and said, we need more details on this platform before I'm going to send you my $5 or whatever it is, right? Like we've got to really run campaigns, and the party at large has to be cool with people running campaigns that look like the communities you're in. The goal of the Democratic Party should be to support folks so that everybody has a certain level of resources. And until we get those resources, we allow people to campaign, and then we go out with a message that doesn't isolate or make people feel that they can't hear that, they don't identify with it, right? Until we have that broad message that everybody wants to be a part of, that appeals to everybody, right? Until we have a holds breath, make America great again, that anybody can say and champion and know exactly what that means because it means something to them individually,
Yeah.
we're going to lose. And the people who do live in these areas, ask a rural Democratic strategist who actually lives in the rural parts. They know what the path is. They could tell you. Our job is getting resources, point blank, period. Like
Yeah.
I spend 85% of my time fundraising for other people because if I can get that, I know I can overperform. I know I can bring people over. And you can look at our past results for that. Whenever I'm able to get, the bell curve for, there's a bell curve of efficiency for how much money you can get. With the state legislative race, you need above $250,000, and about $1 million is where it really starts to, it doesn't really matter. If I can get somebody about $250,000, they will overperform substantially overperform. And that is because they're able to effectively have a message that gets people to have, you have to, it's a different conversation. And I won't go too far into it, but you have to both convince people that race is important and that you're the best option for it. There's a lot more going on. Whereas the presidential race, they know why it's important. They know exactly what it does for the most part. And well, they don't really know what it does, but they have an idea of what it does, right? U.S. Senator, member of Congress.
Yep.
They know some of the issues, right? So they start off on a slightly more educated place. We could sit here and talk about things that the state legislature does that nobody on this call will know. I could tell you about a local bill. They don't care. You know what I mean? Like they don't care until it impacts them. And I think part of this is just having a party that just does all of this at once, right? Like wins in both Chicago, New York, LA, and also Lenore, Blowing Rock, Wake Forest, Roanoke Rapids, right? Greenville. We can do this. We just have to get on the same page.
Yeah.
Because I do believe that we have the issues. I think that our issues would absolutely help the average American. Point blank period. I don't think anybody can argue with that. It's the mindset difference of, are you helping yourself or is someone helping you? Do you know what I mean? There's some nuances to that. And I can think of 3 or 4 other conversations, but just as from someone in the rural areas, we've got to have a party message out there that talks about how we can all do better and how your next vote's going to help everybody rather than you're dumb for doing this. We offer a better way. And we could talk about the nuance of that for quite a while, but
yeah. So I think like something that everybody has kind of gone through since the last election is this like postmortem on Democratic messaging, candidates, like all this stuff across the board. And North Carolina is a pretty good case study as we've sort of gone through here. You know, we haven't voted for a Democrat for president since first Obama election. But obviously we've got several blue governors, AG, some down ballot races went well. We talked a little bit about this offline that, across the country, there seems to be candidates just running to run, or they think that they're a little more, capable of, like you said, online influencer or somebody who's able to, to get an audience, thinks that, okay, I can run for Congress, right? I can be in the U.S. House of Representatives. I want to ask you, because we just talked about messaging, and obviously you have nuanced messaging for different parts of the state, different parts of the country, all that stuff, but it needs to kind of be brought back to doing stuff for voters, and the difference between having sort of a message that's perceived as fractured versus a message that's perceived as nuanced and understanding the individual races. What do you look for in candidates, for all down ballot races, to sort of keep that messaging consistent while also kind of having, them being able to tell you what works in their area or in their region?
That's a great question. I think for every campaign, there's a certain element, and this can be a discussion or it can just be kind of a certain, stance or
Mhm.
posture on it, right? How national are you going to take the race, right? A lot of this depends on the circumstances you're in. Are you running against somebody that people know? Are you running for an office that people know? And from there, I think that what we can do as a party is really encouraging people to go. Let me say this. There is a pipeline, right? For lack of a better word, there really is a pipeline. There
Yep.
are people who run for this and then this and then this, and then they eventually get to where they're at, right? We can look to someone like a Don Davis, mayor of Snow Hill, state house, state senate, member of Congress. You know what I mean? He's worked his way up and through. And what that led to was a substantial overperformance factor where now he's winning a Trump district that nobody else can.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important factor to think about. This is we have to elevate people who have those deep local connections.
Mhm.
Point blank period. There's really no other way to get around it. The secondary to that is they have to both know the concerns and be able to effectively illustrate those concerns and tell people that and understand what they're saying and how it pertains to Congress. That's the part where we struggle with a little bit, right? We get candidates who might be very good at the selfie video, but they can't do the town hall.
Right.
We might get somebody who's very good at the town hall, but can't do the forum. We might get somebody who's good at the high traffic canvas or the shaking hands, but can't do the digital stuff. And very rarely do you get somebody who kind of checks all those boxes of being able to fundraise, communicate, like the modern, like go on MSNBC, do a TikTok video,
Yep.
that type of stuff.
Yep.
There are very few people that can do all those. That's why the people who can do all those are now like immediately jump to the top, and people who check 3 out of 5 or 4 out of 5 will immediately jump to the top and think that the one will catch up. And oftentimes it's people who are good at everything except fundraising, or they're very good at fundraising and nothing else, right? And that hurts our party because what we end up getting is that people who either can suck up all the attention at once that may or may not have earned it, right? That can be able to say, okay, I'm running for this. This is my race. You're not going to know anybody else on the ground. Meanwhile, there's a 3-term state senator who's running against an influencer who wipes the absolute floor with them.
Yeah.
And everybody online's like, huh? How did that happen? It happens more than you think. You know what I mean? And I can think of a couple people where that was last year. Again, I don't want to say any names, but
Mhm.
if you're listening to this and you thought of somebody, that's what I'm thinking of too. Thankfully, the Republicans actually struggle with this, I think, a little bit more than we do.
Yeah.
They had like the WWE crowd and like everybody who served one tour anywhere jumped for Congress
Yeah.
in when Trump was on the ballot. And what happens is kind of the reverse effect for us. When Trump is not on the ballot, we get all these people who jumped 2018, and now we're seeing it now in 2026. So it's kind of interesting to see it come full circle. I think what we've got to do is have a higher standard for candidates, right? People want to see blank, and they want to see blank, and they want to see young folks and dynamic folks and, young dynamic people of color who
Mhm.
also, you know what I mean, who kind of represent their areas. And the truth of the matter is it's very hard to run for Congress. It's hard
Yeah.
to do this. Not everybody's a Maxwell Frost. Not everybody's a Jasmine Crockett.
Right.
Not everybody is an Anderson Clayton. Most people are people you've never heard of. You know what I mean? Like they're the members of Congress that you're like, who is that? Like they're the committee chairs, they're the ranking members, they're the people that have $3 million in their committee, and they're the people who run the DCCC and
Yeah.
run these other areas. So it's a balancing act. I do think that what we've got to do is a better job of putting dynamic young candidates in office whenever we can. When we
Okay.
get an opportunity for the AOCs, we got to take it. But at the end of the day, we also have to have some people who are governors. We got to have some communicators. We got to have some governors. We got to have some party people.
Yeah.
You have to have a healthy mix of all this. And what we're seeing now is that I can bring it back to the state legislative level. We don't really have that at the state house level either. We've got some people who do this, who do this, who do this, but nobody can really do it all. And if they do, they end up running for higher office pretty quickly, or
Okay.
they get to leadership and then they're kind of stuck for a cycle and then they run for higher office. And
I want to push
Yeah, go ahead,
back on
please.
you real quick. So because when you talk about that, we need to have more AOCs. AOC had to kick the door down, right? I mean, she had to take on a very powerful member that just happened to be sleeping, and she worked her ass off, right? We have a problem in our party everywhere of, hey, it's not your turn yet, right? Or I've experienced it myself.
Yep.
I've heard it myself of when I've asked about different offices, and I can tell you that just, I mean, I don't believe that. I know Ian doesn't believe it. We've had that discussion offline. How do we as a party get rid of that mentality, or do you think that we don't need to?
I don't have that mentality either, and I will tell you that mentality is a very old school mentality that exists in certain communities, certain party structures, because one part necessity, one part the way it's always been done,
Yeah.
right? I do understand and sympathize with minority communities or communities that struggle with representation who have a clear pipeline because they know that the person that's in there is the only person who can get in there, right? Let's put those aside, right?
Mhm.
Everybody else, shit or get off the pot. You know what I'm saying? And
Yep.
that's what I will tell you is I think we've got an opportunity for a generational change. And whenever we take hits, we've got to allow it. So there are certain people, I have no problem calling out Dan Blue. I think Dan Blue is part of the worst group of the bunch. And what you saw was that handled itself this year. And now what's Dan Blue doing? Taking tough votes.
Yeah, he's not voting with the party.
No. And
So
that's the whole thing about it is people will show their true
oh, we
colors
lost his mic.
whenever they are given,
Yeah, I lost his mic.
oh,
Well, we lost. You're back.
can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry about that. I got
Yeah.
y'all. But someone like a Dan Blue, what it does is it puts us in a weird spot because that was effectively the leader for a long time who was keeping the caucus holding certain people back, not investing in this candidate, not investing in this candidate. This person's no longer in leadership. This person has decided to run for higher office because they don't see a path forward in the Senate. And what that does is whenever we have folks who kind of bottleneck this stuff up or really force those gatekeeping, wait your turn, you know, we get left behind. And that's exactly what our party has been for many cycles at this point, especially in certain silos, I will say, right? The silos, the decision-making silos have kind of remained somewhat stagnant because it's the way it is, and I understand, listen, I'm not saying that nobody can just come off the street and run for this, right? But there are certain times in which like you have to have that. Like you can't, Adam, if you called me saying I'm running for governor, I'd be like, you're crazy. You don't need to do that. Right. But
I won't ever do that, man. Don't worry.
if Wes Moore, you know what I'm saying? Like the governor of Maryland, right, jumps in and that's his kind of takeoff point. It's a little bit different. You know what I mean? Combat veteran, New York Times bestselling author, you know what I mean? CEO of Robin Hood, like incredibly accomplished person who came in, had some political traction, kind of had always had a plan to do this, had been recruited for multiple things, so on, right? There are circumstances in which I think there are people who should be elevated because they are absolutely the best and brightest among us. And you guys know who I'm talking about. And there are people coming up in the community right now who might be a first-term House member who in 4 years might be our top pick for governor.
Yeah.
And there are some people in mind who I think have absolutely tremendous talent, but they're just getting here. And until we have talent coming in every year, we're going to be struggling as a party. And what that, in my mind, should look like is an encouragement of you take a shot. If you don't do it, let's let the next person get in there. Or you take 2 shots, and if you don't get it, let's let the person in there. Or let's be objective with how you performed as well. I think the conversation needs to be a bit more objective. And that includes like with people that I've worked for in the past. I had someone ask me if they should run this year. I looked at the numbers. They underperformed Kamala Harris. I said, I don't think you should. I think you should give somebody else a chance.
Mm-hmm.
But in the same vein, there are some people who are a little bit more of decision makers than I am, and they have elevated people who underperformed last year. And that's a concern of mine. That's going to continue to be a concern. I'm pretty consistent on that. It has absolutely nothing to do with the person. It's the process. We worked for Lindsey Prather last year. Lindsey Prather is a great example of who we need to look for as a candidate. From North Carolina, went to UNC Asheville, was a teacher at the local public school, involved with the party, had absolutely no interest in running for office until someone had a conversation with her, which happened to be the state rep at the time. Whenever he stepped back, he said, I want you to consider this. She did. She ran. She won. Got in leadership. They gerrymandered her. Then she comes back and wins a Trump district last year by overperforming, 3 and some change, and was the top Democrat last year in terms of performance. We could have dozens of those across the state, right? Dante Pittman, great example. National Guard captain, local, he worked in local government for many cycles. His grandpa was extremely well known. His family was extremely well known. There ain't a Pittman. You could throw a rock and hit 3 Pittmans in Wilson County. And he went out there, and leveraged all that and ran a great campaign and used the party resources to run his campaign, not ran a party campaign and was just the face of it. And he won, and he overperformed Trump, or overperformed Kamala, winning a Trump district. We could have a couple more of those folks if we pick the right people.
Yeah.
Too often we get sucked down by interest groups who want someone who fits a particular demographic, or we get sucked down by someone who had ran previously that may have more resources or more connections to the party. If we were slightly more objective about looking for the people who were good communicators, kind of had that raw talent, could come in, could then govern, I think we'd be in a much better place. But we have an opportunity to do that. I want to be very clear. We have many cycles to do that, starting with local office here in North Carolina this year, state ledge next year, and then the 26, 28, 30 is going to be the most important cycles for North Carolina at the state legislative level.
So sort of on that same frame, I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm in East Charlotte, and I was, we actually went, my neighborhood and surrounding area, we actually went bluer this time than last election, which was cool to see. We're getting a lot more young people in here. But the one thing that when I kind of went across to Western Mecklenburg County, the one thing I kind of got pushback on, I guess, by even some, high propensity Democratic voters was like, there wasn't really a lot of stagnation, basically. There weren't a lot of candidates who excited them, from top of the ballot all the way down to the bottom of the ballot. And it's kind of goes to, switching younger. That's what everybody's talking about right now. But how, it's a difficult conversation to have, I think, and maybe we don't really have an answer for it, but you've got people winning races at, the U.S. House level that have been running for a long time. They're going to win. There's just momentum at this point. It's just going to keep them in there, but they're not really doing the extra stuff to help down ballot races, exciting voters and all that. I'm not going to name any names either, but you know where I am. So I think everybody can probably figure out who I'm talking about or the people that I'm talking about here. How do we, what do you do about that? That's a very tough conversation to have, to say, hey, you've won, 5 straight elections by a significant margin. We're in a very blue district here, but we need something that's going to help not just Mecklenburg County, but the whole state. We need to be exciting again.
Yep. That has to do a little bit with the generational change we were talking about earlier, right? There has to be a point in which people who are in power feel obligated to turn it over. And I don't know that we as a party have done a good job of setting those standards and kind of setting that, okay, some people want to talk about age. Some people want to talk about performance. Some people want to talk about, the ideology or whatever they do in the campaign. I understand all of those factors, but at the end of the day, like as a party, if we're not constantly bringing new people to whatever forefront debate stage it is, right? If we're not constantly elevating people, constantly allowing people to take shots at higher offices, we're doing a disservice, right? And we talked about that a little bit. I think there's a certain level of establishment that comes, and of course it's a much harder to knock someone off who is a member of Congress than it is who's a local person or vice versa. And there's going to be situations everywhere. I think at the end of the day, what we've got to do as a party is offer choices, right? And encourage choices and encourage people to offer those, take them serious, and ask questions of people, right? I think primaries are a beautiful thing. Are they annoying sometimes? Yeah, absolutely. But I think primaries are a very, very beautiful thing. And as a party, we've gotten a lot of people out, through that, right? Like we were just talking about AOC. She primaried like the third ranking Democrat in the House at the time, right? Yeah. She didn't ask. She didn't ask nicely. She didn't meet with, Nancy Pelosi and the DCCC and say, hey, I want to do this. Can I wait?
She just went for it.
She said, I'm going to do it. And if you beat me, you beat me. If you don't, you don't. Right. And I know of a couple other people, who are in that circumstance. I've worked on a couple primaries as well, of people who I felt like were very deserving of it. There are certain circumstances where I think it's important that we think about like representation and allowing, adequate representation and allowing someone who is doing a good job to continue to do that.
Sure.
But I think that we as a party probably don't call into question people's intentions, especially long term, right? Like, especially when you've got a bottleneck of someone, and in North Carolina, we only have 4 Democratic seats, right? So it's really, there's only a couple people who are in Congress right now, and a heap of people who kind of want to be at some point,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And you think about like if they do 4 or 5 terms, right? That's 10 years. That's 8 or 10 years, and like that adds up quickly. A couple of 10 years in a row, a couple people in front of you, and then you're probably not going to get a chance to go to Congress. And I think some of that is just like opportunity and circumstances, which I understand.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, we should have a good pipeline of people who are constantly coming, offering new ideas, moving on. I think other states have done this well. I came up in Illinois, and there's a pretty healthy, crop of new faces in Illinois every couple of years, even though it is a very, very establishment heavy
Yeah.
machine party politics, right? They still have a pipeline, and people kind of respect that. And you've got people who've served it for 20 years and they're at the top, and they get out of there. They don't all run for U.S. Senator, all run for governor, right? They serve, they get their pension, they go home, and they serve as a precinct chair or whatever, right? If we had more people who saw the party as like a service, something that they could not only influence, but kind of leverage, right? As something that people wanted to be a part of again, then I think we'd be in a much better spot. And all these situations, I really think would start to handle themselves.
Yeah.
If member of Congress who's 84 says, I know of this person who's in my district who's 35, their kids are, at the point now where they can start to come to DC and kind of, they know and they're aware of like what their parents are doing or whatever it is, right? And can serve, and they turned it over, right? And then that person went and got to like 60. It was like, oh, well, it's my time to kind of turn it over. I'm going to run for this or whatever it is. And it's like every couple of years, 6 to 8 years, there was someone new in there. We'd probably be in a better spot.
Yeah.
But that, there's also, let me just make the counterpoint of, we also need people who can go in there and govern, right?
For sure.
Who can come in and show up on day one. So we have to have a good pipeline, but then when it gets to this point, somebody's got to do something, right? Like they can't just be stopped because the person in front of them doesn't want to leave and is serving their 14th term or whatever it is.
Right.
So I agree with both of those things. I think that as a party, we can do both of these things. We can handle both of these issues at once.
Mm-hmm.
And it has to do with just generally giving folks, an avenue, a very clear path forward, and, meaningful opportunities to get involved, win or loss.
Yeah.
So, you talked about primaries just a minute ago. Let me take this little federally here. Just this past week, Wiley Nickel announced that he was going to run for senator here in North Carolina. A lot of people are saying that Roy Cooper is, we're expecting him to run there. I've heard a lot that Wiley was in communication with Cooper, and he had always said that he would not run if Roy was going to run. I don't know if that's true or not, but what do you think that race ends up looking like?
Yeah, that's a good question. I haven't spoken to Wiley or Governor Cooper. I will say that I would bet whatever amount of money I have right now in my 401k that's still standing, right? That Wiley will drop out if Governor Cooper gets in. That being said, do I blame Wiley for jumping in whenever he's really wanted to do this for 3 calendar years and is, someone who has kind of been sitting on a launch, waiting and giving some opportunity for the governor to make his decision? I don't blame him.
Yeah.
It's a weird situation. I don't want to speculate about if the governor's going to run or not. That's really up to him. I know right now he's finishing a fellowship at Harvard, and is my understanding. I saw someone on Twitter tweet that he was their professor or whatever, and that was cool.
Nice.
So I think it's cool that Governor Cooper's kind of getting some chance to just to chill out for a minute.
Yeah.
I think he wants that. He's a very normal person. Like if you've ever met Roy Cooper, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
He's
He
very
is
down to earth.
Yeah.
an
Very
incredibly,
down to earth.
almost like, can you run for president? You're kind of a little bit, you know what I mean? Can you run for Senate? Like you're
Yeah.
a little too normal. And I
Yeah.
think that's a great thing. I think he would, honestly, if he could shake every voter's hand in the primary, he'd clean house in 28. But the
Yeah.
problem is that he's a very, very good retail politician. He's a very good governor. He does the job well.
Yeah.
Can you get elected by doing the job well?
Yeah.
Remains to be seen.
Sure.
Right.
So,
Especially whenever he doesn't go on MSNBC every other
and then
day.
a final question here for you before we get to our Jackass of the week. Who do you think, long shot right now, who's your black horse candidate for 2028 president?
Oh, Oh man, God,
Long shot, long shot.
I know you guys are.
What
You
did Adam call it the other? The darkest horse.
You guys are, you guys are, I'm about to say, yeah, the way too early 2028
Yeah.
predictions. You guys are trying to hurt my business here. Not that I'm a presidential,
Right.
contract getter, but the South Carolina is the first state. North Carolina's not too far behind. I really like Wes Moore. I think Wes Moore brings,
Okay.
he's the complete package.
He hasn't been on our radar, so
No.
Wes Moore, the governor of Maryland. If you don't know, now you know. A very, very talented guy. I read his book decades ago. I mean, in school, and I never knew that was the same person until he ran for governor. And I looked. He is an incredibly accomplished person. Who I think is a expert communicator. He can
Super
be,
polished.
bro. He's also absolutely jacked and like physically, and both like how he talks and how he carries himself. Very masculine. Very like. Go ahead and call him out, Ted Cruz. He will beat the shit out of you. Do you know what I mean? Like literally, I would put Wes Moore in there. I would, if I was Wes Moore, I would literally tell Trump I'm going to do a push-up competition next to him right now and just start cranking him up. Show me that, old man. Do you know what I mean?
He's got the cool stories, a cool dude, a good speaker, masculine, played football. Like he's got everything, man.
Bro, he went out to the Ravens camp, like just as like the governor out there, and bro, like fit in. Do you know what I'm saying?
God,
like standing next to the linebackers, like just fitting in. Like that dude started at fucking tight end for the Panthers next year. If I have anything to say. Wes Moore, absolute, probably my dark horse. In terms of people who like we kind of know, I like Raphael Warnock a lot. I think he is an incredibly talented communicator. Oh my gosh. If you've never heard him speak, I'm not really a religious person. I grew up in a very like extreme church. That man makes me like want to come back to Christ. Do you know what I'm saying? And just like absolutely like he is the best communicator I've ever met. Probably one of the nicest people in general. I've heard nothing but good things about him. Also like Cory Booker. I think JB Pritzker to be a billionaire, which I despise all billionaires. I think JB's a good dude. Like I've met him a couple times. He was the guy who I did College Democrats of Illinois whenever I went to college there. I did a football scholarship at St. Francis, and I was the college gyms president. That dude made it a point to like call all of the individual college gyms president. He bought a hotel for convention, like just bought it all out. We all had free rooms. He owns the hotel, but still. He bought it out. You know what I mean? He can't just like wave a magic wand. He has to like actually buy it out because of compliance reasons. So he bought it out. We had our convention, and he just spent the whole day like just like hanging out with people. Got to know personally 200-300 young college Dems, and I know dozens of people who still work for him because of that interaction that he had, where he just hung out with us and really just made himself accessible. I also know a lot of people who've called him for different projects and different things that he had no reason to support him and went out of his way to do so. And I think that's an incredibly important as someone who's generous, someone who's willing to put their own kind of personal stakes on the table. I think it's important. And I'm not saying everybody has to be a billionaire, but the fact that he is and he's willing to leverage that is also a very important thing for us. So I like him.
I think if he was a class trader, kind of like FDR
I'm with it.
I think he's a phenomenal choice.
Yep. Anybody but Gavin Newsom. Anybody but Gavin Newsom.
We agree.
Kamala Harris. If we're nominating somebody from California, it has to be her. That's it.
Yeah.
That is my start and stop tolerance of people from California. And that's probably my field right now. There's a couple other people that I like that I'm going to be watching. I think a lot of people are in the running for vice president. I think that's really what's happening here. There's it's separating the the men from the boys, so to speak, like the folks who are really putting it together and have that profile versus the people who don't and are kind of struggling to get that. So we'll definitely see what that primary looks like, but I'm definitely looking forward to it. The only thing that like I think has been particularly relevant that has come from, well, I don't want to say the only thing, but it's something an idea that I've seen recently that's got some traction is like us doing our primary a lot earlier.
Yeah.
I'm for that.
Yep.
Definitely.
I'm actually really for that. I think that's actually a great idea of doing it in 27 instead of 28.
Yep.
But I think it's probably too early to do. You know what I'm saying? We can't pull that off, I don't think, at this point. But in the future, I do want to kind of put that idea out there instead of a 2032. If we have it, God forbid, we have an open primary. But 2032, I think 2031 would be a great time for us to do it, and then give a full year, to campaign. Yeah, year and a half. I think would be great. That's a great idea.
So We're going to move into our Jackass of the week. We haven't done one in a minute. We did have our college basketball tournament winner in Donald Trump. I don't think that anybody suspected that he would not be the winner. But
Hard
we're
to
going to
top
have.
him.
It's just like the NCAA this year. The number one seeds got through, right?
Got to give congrats to. I think we might have to take a minute to let Ian. Before we go into Jackass of the week, let Ian rail on
Yeah,
his
I'm not
team.
going to talk too much about it. I actually and I talked to Adam on Twitter about this when I was whining about Florida not being number one in the rankings back in like December, and I was like, no, they're the best team in the country. Blah blah blah. Anyway, yeah, we won it. It was a good tournament, bunch of good games, and feeling pretty good about it. I won't belabor this point too
Like
much.
any respectful, self-respecting North Carolinian, there ain't no way in hell I was pulling for Duke. So go ahead, man. Go ahead, man. Duke. The joke about Duke is like, I don't know why you want to go to New Jersey for college. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't make a lot of sense.
Oh man,
Sorry to all the Duke
yeah.
fans out there.
All right, so let's we're going to have a first here on the show. We are going to actually allow our guest to pick our Jackass of the week this week. So we're going to tee that up for you there, Grayson.
Grayson,
Who
who
do you
you got?
who you
Okay.
got?
So I told them at the front of the call. I said Jefferson Griffin is like our standing.
Yeah.
He's got the crown until that situation gets resolved, and even beyond. But my jackass of the week is my hometown hero, Destin Hall, North Carolina House Speaker this year. He's a brand new speaker. He's been kind of he won a contest between three stooges of the Republican Party last year, and he ended up raising the most money and came out as the speaker. So um, this week there were several bills that the General Assembly that the North Carolina Democrats were advocating against. So we packed the gallery a couple days in a row, and every single day that we did that, he moved the bill to the next day that we were there to protest, and then now it's next week, and I'm sure he will just keep doing it until they have a midnight session. So Destin Hall, Republican from Caldwell County and Watauga County, your jackass of the week. I'm calling it here. And
Love it.
we'll see what he does this upcoming week. But him and Jefferson Griffin are probably smoking cigars at the country club in Raleigh.
So didn't he have like a major thing come out last year? Like it was either like his bachelor
Yeah,
party or
yeah,
His
something.
wedding, right?
yeah. It was his wedding. It was like his pre-wedding bachelor party
Okay.
type thing. Yeah, they were up in the hills, is my understanding. I think they were actually out of state. I want to say they were somewhere, and there was a few guys who fell out the back of a truck whenever they were drinking in the back, and they were
One
in a
guy got
field
hurt
or
bad.
something. Yeah, he got hurt bad, temporary blind. He like knocked
Yeah.
his back concussion. Called it
Didn't they
like
didn't they leave the scene and then come back?
it,
Isn't that
I
what?
don't want to get too far into
Oh,
specifics,
man.
but you should Google Destin Hall bachelor party
Yeah.
and just it was a very. I will say this, like it does not surprise me. I will say
Yeah.
that, and
Okay.
I think that a lot of the Republicans sit in Raleigh, and this ain't just a Destin thing. A lot of Republicans sit in Raleigh and pretend like they're going to church on Wednesday and Sunday, and that they don't do nothing wrong, and that they're there for the collective interest and everybody, and holding the right wing line. But truth is, man, they're self interested. They're all self interested. They're all down there to make something of themselves and run for
Yeah.
whatever office or promote whatever lobbying organization, and look to what they do when they leave the General Assembly. If you don't believe me, genuinely, that's how this works. Google Jason Sane. You know what I mean? That's all you have to do.
Or
Just
or
look these folks up, man. Paul Newton, just look them up. They're
yeah.
terrible people, and they really can't even defend their actions. So they know what they're doing. They're conscious about it. I know Destin. I've known Destin for a long time. Destin and I don't talk about politics when we see each other. Not that we see each other as much as, because I moved to Burke County. He's from Caldwell, where I grew up. But I even think Destin goes down there and does some stuff he don't agree with, just because his, friends of lobbying, and all this stuff, and it's destroying our state, folks. So even if you don't like Democrats, we don't go down there and play buddy buddy with and marry lobbyists and all that crap. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah.
So
So congratulations, Destin Hall.
that's right.
On
You're our
being our
jackass of the week.
jackass of the week.
Well,
A
Grayson,
distinct honor.
we greatly we greatly appreciate you being on with us this week. What is it that we can help you out with? Are you plugging anything? Can people find you online? What do you want to plug here?
I don't plug nothing except for get involved with your local Democratic Party. If you're thinking about running for office, you should do it. If you're someone who wants to have a conversation with somebody about running for office, particularly in North Carolina, give me a call. You can find me on literally any social media, Grayson for NC. Just look up Grayson Barnette or Express Lane Strategies. You can look that up as well. Feel free to give me give me a shout, get in contact. I don't charge people for conversations. I'm more than happy to help you about, make with your decision making process and everything like that. I try to, we started to help young people who wanted to get in office, young people who wanted to work on campaigns, or really just working class, well-intentioned people who wanted to work on campaigns or get involved or run for office themselves. We try to be the resource pool and conduit for folks who are really well-intentioned, but maybe don't know how to make those first steps. We'll help you get started. We'll help you do it legit, and we'll help you win. As my business partner says, you can't govern unless you win. So keep that in mind. And I appreciate everybody. Thanks for the conversation, Adam, me, and I appreciate all y'all are doing, and everybody listening. Thanks again for keeping North Carolina at the top of your Battleground state list.
Oh yeah.
Damn right, man. Always.
That's right.
Well, that's going to be our show this week, folks. If you liked it, please go on Apple Music, Spotify, YouTube, like us, share us, review us, send us to people that don't like Democrats. Let them hear this. Let them hear that we are having that conversation about how we can get their vote. That's the biggest, most important thing that you can do is get this podcast shared and let them know that we are talking about them. We do care about them. We want them to vote for us, and we want to have those conversations. So that's going to be it for us this week. We're going to be out of here, and till next time.
Later, guys.